Hello from my side as well. I'm Konstantinos Eleftheriadis. I am the partner in charge for Energy, Resource and Industrials of Deloitte in Greece. Welcome. We are really honored to have you here in our premises. We are going now to a panel where we are going to discuss regarding the energy transition, the main theme, the main topic of our symposium. I would like to call to come to stage the panelists, distinguished panel that we have, Mr. Dagoumas, Ms. Wuta, and also Mr. Pouliaresi, and we will have also online Mr. Alsauskas. So, we said that we are going to discuss regarding energy transition, and we are going to see together some of the main risks that are associated with energy transition. We are going to discuss about, we were going to focus actually on affordability, on security. We are going to discuss regarding the necessary steps in order to make sure that we have a proper future for the energy markets. And we are going to see also how we can avoid having energy transition as a threat and how to make this as an opportunity, taking into consideration also what is happening in Greece and in the wider area in the Balkans and Europe. First of all, I would like again to say a big thank you to our panelists, Mr. Athanasios Dagoumas, the President of the Regulatory Authority for Energy, Water and Waste, Ms. Liana Guta, Director General of European Fuel Manufacturers Association, Mr. Lucian Pouliaresi, President of an Energy Policy Research Foundation, and we have also online Mr. Oskaras Alsauskas, Energy Modeler and Analyst in the World Economic Energy Outlook team. We have a presentation for Mr. Alsauskas, so we'll start with the presentation, and then we are going to go directly to our panel discussion. So, Mr. Alsauskas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hope you can see my screen now. Yeah, okay. I think it's all good. Can you hear me well? Can you just confirm?
We can see your screen, yes.
Nice. Thank you very much. So, thank you a lot for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here and to present to you World Energy Outlook 2024. So without further ado, let's get into it and let's start the symposium. I'll try to focus on some of the key highlights that would be relevant for the discussion introduced. One of the key highlights from the World Energy Outlook 2024 is that we are entering into a new energy market context, a context that is driven by increased geopolitical risks and energy security concerns, but also where we can expect lower end-use prices. A good example for that is the oil markets right now. Today, there are well over 5 million barrels of crude oil spare capacity per day in the oil-producing countries. This spare capacity of oil production is expected to increase further by 2030, reaching 8 million barrels of oil per day in OPEC plus countries alone. And that means that we are entering into a market that is very well supplied in terms of oil. And so we can expect a downward pressure on the end user prices because of it. We have a similar situation entering into LNG market as well. Although right now it is relatively tight, we expect it to become much more glut in the coming 5 years or so, with a new big wave of LNG export capacities coming online from US and Qatar. And so the utilization factor of LNG export capacities declines from around 95% today to 80% by 2030, again, giving indication that we are in this market that is well supplied and that consumer can expect lower end-use prices. And then we have a similar situation in other key clean technology manufacturing, like solar PV. For example, in the past 5 years, solar PV deployments globally has risen by around 4 times, while the manufacturing capacities for these solar PVs has risen 6 times. So currently we are globally at the sort of overcapacity for solar PVs, and then we have a similar situation for battery manufacturing. So all in all, we are in this market where we can expect a bit more competition by producers for consumers, or therefore more downward pressure on the energy prices. But then there are caveats, of course, to mention. So even in a well-supplied market, there are threats, security threats. And for example, for fossil fuels, a good example to mention is the Strait of Hormuz. A lot of the spare capacities for oil and LNG, they're in the Middle East, and they're using Strait of Hormuz to get into the international markets. And so any kind of geopolitical escalations there could minimize the benefits that we are having due to this ample supply. And then a caveat for clean technology manufacturing is that most of the technologies are being manufactured in one country, in China. So we have a high concentration of the supply chains of these, for example, 2 key clean technologies like solar PVs and batteries. And this is another concern because, again, geopolitical tensions, extreme weather events, even accidents in industrial facilities can lead to difficulties getting hands on these clean technologies. So even in a well-supplied market, there is really no place for complacency when it comes to energy security. And this is one of the highlights from the World Energy Outlook. And so not even all of markets are that well supplied. This is not the case for sure for critical minerals. So we did a quite detailed analysis in World Energy Outlook. We looked at all of the announced projects for critical mineral production by 2035. And what we see is that investments are picking up in some of the key minerals, but not for copper, for example, which is essential to electrify our economies. And it's become even more concerning when we look at the projected demand for these minerals. And what we see is that by 2035, there is a gap opening up between the demand that we are projecting and the supply that is expected to come online based on the projects that are currently announced. This is not to say that demand should therefore be limited. Of course, this gap can be closed, but this is to say that to send a message for policymakers, for the industry, that we need to see more investments in mining and refining, in recycling innovations to close this gap between the supply and demand that might open up in the coming years for a critical minerals sector. Another highlight important to mention is that we are entering into the age of electricity, and in the past 10 years, electricity consumption globally has increased twice as fast as the total energy demand. And in the next 10 years, we expect that the electricity consumption will grow 6 times as fast as the total energy demand. And so if we look where this demand comes from, it's mostly China, of course, but also we have other emerging and developing economies. As people gain income there, they connect to the grids, they are able to start cooling their households. And so we see a big amount of electricity consumption coming online by 2035. And most of the consumption is coming from conventional uses. So again, clean, light industries mostly, but also manufacturing. In China, it is closely related to manufacturing of clean technologies. Again, cooling demand drives the growth of electricity consumption. But then we have new uses such as EVs and data centers that drive electricity consumption in advanced economies mainly. And so if we look at the global CO2 emissions, we do expect an imminent peak for those in the energy sector. However, the issue here is that the decline after the peak is reached is very gradual. It is far from the decline we would need to have if we want to reach our climate commitments made in the Paris Agreement, commitments made in COP28, for example. And so we in the IEA we wanted to highlight two key infrastructure pieces that would enable us to reach these commitments in full and to fully benefit from the electrification and in general growth of renewables in our economies. And so one key aspect here is, of course, the electricity grids. We estimate that by 2030, we need to build out or refurbish around 25 million kilometers of grids globally if we want to be on track, basically, to reach our climate commitments. And this number needs to increase to 55 million kilometers by 2035, enabling us to distribute the clean electrons in a reliable manner. And then another key piece of technology here to mention is the storage capacity. We estimate that by 2030, we would need to have a global storage capacity reaching 1,500 gigawatts, and around 1,200 of these gigawatts would need to come from battery storage, just highlighting how important this technology is as we move forward in decarbonization. And it would mean that battery storage deployments would need to grow by 15 times. And this is really a daunting task, especially 2030 is basically just around the corner. But this is already something we have seen before with solar PVs, for example. Since the Paris Agreement, they have risen in a similar manner. So there are there are reasons to be optimistic. And my last slide here is to touch on affordability, as mentioned in the introduction. It will be one of the key topics here today. And so in the World Energy Outlook, we looked at the household energy expenditures, annual energy expenditures for advanced economies and for emerging and developing economies. And we compared different scenarios, a scenario where we are moving ahead based on current policy settings, and a scenario where we are compliant with our climate commitments or 1.5 degree pathway, as we say. And so what we can see is that in advanced economies, the faster decarbonization results in lower energy bills for end consumer at the end of the day, as people quickly reap the benefits of electrification of electric vehicles, of heat pumps, refurbishing of their home efficiencies, and also due to lower demand for fossil fuels, resulting in lower fossil fuel prices in general. However, this is not the case for emerging market and developing economies. There, in a faster decarbonization case, we see a rise in their energy bills as we would need to phase out fossil fuels, introduce CO2 prices as such. But still, at the end of the day, in the long term, faster decarbonization, if done properly, results in lower energy bills for emerging market and developing economies as well. So this is just to say that if done properly, decarbonization can also result in affordability benefits for the end consumer. However, we really must prioritize the infrastructure build out and strategic planning as we move forward with that. And so hopefully didn't take up a lot of the time for the discussion, and I finished my presentation here and happy to participate in further conversations.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alsauskas. I think this has been really insightful, significant load of data to digest, but you close your statement by saying that decarbonization can also be at competitive prices. To tell you the truth, this is something that we are struggling to see at the moment, at least in Greece, maybe in the region in general, but this is something to discuss, and I think that we are going to cover this in our panel. Mr. Pouliaresi, I will start with you, and I will say the following. I think that in the energy transition, speed and security are two of the critical factors that we have to take into consideration. Now, with your experience, I think that you have seen a number of situations similar to the one that we are living today. What do you think are the policy measures, the investment frameworks that we should have in order to have, let's say, equilibrium between speed and security?
So, the first thing is we don't even have a good production function for electricity. And in the United States, I mean, I thought it was very curious, Oscar's comment that in the end, renewables are cheaper. This is not the case in the United States. It's not the case around the world, because intermittent power is extremely expensive to manage. And we have made a kind of mockery of this because we published all this data years ago, Lazard, on levelized cost of energy, but they had nothing to do with what it really costs to manage intermittent power. We have a long-term relationship with the government of Japan, the Institute for Energy Economics in Japan, and Tokyo Electric Power, 15 years ago, gave us their data, which says beyond 30%, they cannot manage the costs in intermittent power very well. And the notion of batteries and everything. So I think if you look at the Trump administration, they're saying, look, the United States has a comparative advantage in fossil fuels. Between 2010 and 2020, the U.S. alone fulfilled 90% of incremental demand in crude oil and 50% incremental demand in natural gas. The U.S. now produces 100 billion cubic feet a day with less than 200 rigs. If you go back 10 years, to produce 60 billion cubic feet a day, talk 1,500 rigs. So there's a massive efficiency taking place in the United States in fossil fuels. And then you have the hangover with Fatih Birol and the IEA telling everybody that, well, if you just stopped investing in oil and gas, we could get to net zero. And these kinds of policies, which kind of abandon all kind of standard economic theory, have led us into a really sort of hot mess, which the administration is reacting to very vigorously. I won't take up more time. I did post a set of slides on the website. I hope you'll look at it. And I hope you'll take a look at our Power Vision 2030 study, which you just type that number into Google, it's the first one that comes up.
So given the example of the US, do you think that in the EU, in the European Union, should we include more gas, more oil, more alternative fuels in the mix in order to make this more sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real problem is we had this, so you know, one of the words in the name of this organization is economists, right? And economists used to be good at figuring out what stuff costs. But when it came to net zero, that was sort of abandoned. No one ever wanted to talk about what it costs. And so we didn't have the kind of in-depth analysis of which we should have had to help policymakers understand how do we deploy these fuels of the future in a rational way. And I think that, by the way, I tell you, we've been all through South Asia, right? If you go to I can tell you a story, the head of the power division of Indonesia, he said, you know, John Kerry, everybody's here telling us we have to do this for net zero, that for net zero. There are 290 million people in Indonesia. It's hot. Everybody wants an air conditioner. And I don't care what my president says about COP 47, whatever it is. If I raise the price by 1 or 2 cents, I'm out of a job. And so unless you can come here and show us a way to produce electricity that's cheaper than we're producing now, we're really not interested. Now, we might be interested in lowering particulate emissions in the big cities and stuff like that. But climate, I can tell you, in the developing world, it is not the #1 issue. The #1 issue is affordability and security.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Dagoumas, I will now come to you, and I will say that, as we heard, maybe a different perspective in the different continents of around the globe. So we have been focusing on, significantly focusing on energy transition in Europe and in Greece in general, where we have been something like champions in the energy transition across the European countries, which is very, very good, of course, as a country. Do you think that there are lessons learned that we can use in Greece in order to move towards a more sustainable future, to have more security? And I know that you are focusing also on technical aspects, so can you give us also some technical steps to do so?
Thank you, first of all, for the introduction, and I'm very glad to participate in it. Can you hear me now? Yes. Thank you for the introduction, and it's my great pleasure to be at the 10th Hellenic Association of Energy Economics Symposium. Concerning policy issues, of course, we follow the developments in other continents. That's why we are discussing within ACER, the European regulator, the co-optimization of balancing capacity with a day-ahead market, which is being implemented in the States, and we are supporting as the Greek regulator to be implemented because this provides a more reliable solution of the day-ahead market. When we discuss energy transition, we can see different aspects. Of course, affordability is the first. Decarbonization is another one, which has been very fast implemented because of the rapid penetration of renewables. Over the last years, and especially over the last month, because of the blackout in Iberia, reliability has been emerged as one of the first priorities, which is always a priority for the energy engineers. So now we are discussing about inverter-based systems, and technical aspects of the system are very important. We are discussing about how to have grid-forming inverters in the system, mainly the capability of all the renewables and storage system to provide inertia in the system. We are also discussing about the capability of the TSO and DSO to coordinate and also to install components in the grid like STATCOMs, static synchronous compensators, like FACTS, flexible AC transmission systems, like dynamic light rating, the capability of changing the capability of the line to absorb renewables, like synchronous condensers, and other components that provide inertia to the system. All these are very important because in the previous year we were discussing that the renewables create a need for flexible assets like storage and demand response. Ramping capacity is not the only needed technical element, but the capability of all those assets to provide inertia in the system. So these are being emerged in the discussion, and as a regulator we have already approved all these projects to be implemented by the TSO. So it's up to the TSO and the DSO to coordinate and implement in proper timing all these components in order to have affordable, clean, and reliable system.
Thank you, Mr. Dagoumas. And the reality is that these investments are totally necessary in order to have the security in our system. And we have to see, however, how this also if this is also a priority for other countries in the region, because we have a significant grid expansion to communicate with these countries. So it's not only investments for Greece, but it's also investments for the wider Europe region, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so Ms. Guta, let me come to you. And we are discussing regarding batteries, we are discussing about photovoltaics, wind, renewables. But in reality, when we are discussing about sustainability and energy transition in Europe, we are also discussing about sustainable liquid fuels, alternative fuels. There are a number of directives, there are a number of schemes, there are support mechanisms in Europe, there are significant elements that support this kind of fuels, and there is also a path in order to support them in the future. In Greece, I think that we are a bit behind, correct? Do you think that there are areas that we can support further? Do you think that it is an area that we should focus more in order to succeed in the energy transition through this route as well?
Yes. Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the organizers for having me here. It's a pleasure to share the panel with these esteemed panelists. And it's a pleasure to be here representing the fuel manufacturing industry, because I'm afraid that very often we forget, when we talk about transition, we forget that it's not only about renewable electricity, but it is also about molecules and about the fuels that will be needed in order to achieve the ambition of climate neutrality. And let me start with a short introduction regarding the sector I'm representing, the fuel manufacturing industries, as I mentioned, which means our members cover 100% of the refining capacity in the EU, UK, Norway, and Switzerland. And we supply the energy that is needed to cover more than 97% of all transport modes across road, air, and sea. And also, we supply 50% of the feedstock that the chemical industry needs. So that means that we are part of the energy security of the industrial competitiveness and the resilience of our economies, because we are so very much interconnected with all these sectors. And we are interconnected not only today regarding the energy security and resilience, as I said, but also regarding our transformation, because if we want to decarbonize our economies, this has to come through our products as well, and the decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors such as aviation, maritime, a share of the road transport as well, the chemical industry and other industrial sector, the defense sector as well. All those sectors, decarbonization depends on our decarbonization and on our renewable fuels and industrial products. The truth is that, first of all, our sector fully endorses the climate ambition towards climate neutrality, and we envision becoming the engine of this decarbonization in Europe. The thing is that we need to have a strong business case in order to proceed with the investments that will be needed, and we are talking about multi-billion investments by 2050. The good news is that the transition of our sector has already started, and among the 93 industrial sites operating across Europe, 8 of them are biorefineries, which means refineries that have been converted to biorefineries, already producing 100% renewable fuels. We also have more than 6,000 fuel stations across Europe supplying 100% renewable diesel, and we also produce the sustainable aviation fuels that meet the mandate in 2025, the mandate of 2% of SAF in jet fuels, and we will also meet the mandate of 6% by 2030. But if you ask me if this is enough, I'm afraid it's not, because this is just the beginning. And in order to speed up and to proceed with the transformation of this huge strategic sector of fuel manufacturing, we need to have a strong business case. This is not, unfortunately, the case in Europe. There is an action plan, I would say, missing in Europe, which would address all challenges of our sector. And as I said, we are interlinked with many other sectors. Our transition is more difficult and more complex, I would say, than the transition of other energy-intensive industries, because we need to change everything. We need to change our process, our products, our feedstock, our business model. We need to have new value chains in order to supply, to have access to sustainable feedstock, sustainable biomass, and other sustainable feedstock. And this is something that our sector cannot do, we cannot do on our own. So we need an umbrella, we need an EU strategy or an EU action plan to support and address all these challenges. Regarding Greece, I would like to say that in Greece we are likely to have 4 refineries for a population of 10 million, which is a high number. This is unusual, I would say, and they are all modern, very efficient refineries with multi-million investments that happened recently to all those refineries. And therefore, they are very export-oriented. More than 60% of the production capacity is exported to neighboring areas, which means refining sector is the major pillar of the trade balance in our country. And we believe that this sector can play a crucial role in the next years for Greece, because Greece should support the competitiveness and the transformation of this sector in order to become, hopefully, a hub for renewable fuels. And together with a very favorable position of our country in the proximity to areas with abundant and low-cost renewable electricity, Greece could become a hub of renewable fuels, not only bio-based fuels, but also a hub of green hydrogen, a hub of e-fuels production, because e-fuels need green hydrogen, and Greece could be the gateway for Europe for all these new technologies. And we need to remember and understand that the climate neutrality ambition by 2050 cannot be achieved if Europe is not able to produce the renewable fuels that are needed. And if we want to deliver by 2050, investments must start now. The time to invest is now. And regarding the speed, the speed and stability, I believe that right now we are not anymore in the question of what. We have the targets, and these targets are clear and unchanged. I believe that we shouldn't either speak about the speed, because we should move fast, and as I said, we need to invest today. The main question and the main risk, in my view, is the how, and which is the right pathway to achieve all this without having unexpected side effects, without Europe shooting itself in the foot, and without killing its industry.
And I think you are right on the fact that everything has to do at the end, you mentioned this, regarding the financial viability of all these investments. At the end of the day, they have to be supported somehow, because they do not seem to be economically viable without any support mechanisms. And we have seen, I think, at the moment, supporting specific areas of the renewable business, mostly on photovoltaics and wind. We have to see also support in the other areas in order to direct the security and the sustainability of the systems through these pathways. But do you think that in the next decade, because the National Plan for Greece, it says that we should have a focus also on renewables for hydrogen and to produce hydrogen, etc. Do you think that we can, at the moment that where we stand today, do you think that with the investments that we have, or the investments that are coming to Greece from multinational companies, from foreign investments, do you think that we can expedite the process and become a front runner? Because the front runner would get the competitive advantage in terms of Europe.
I can say that we haven't seen such an initiative on behalf of Greece, but I think it's a great opportunity that should not be missed. And I believe that Greece should take the lead to support this strategic industry of fuel manufacturing for the reasons I just explained. And I'm sure that there are other countries willing to support countries with very strong fuel manufacturing industries, such as Italy, Poland, Portugal, Spain, and so on. And I believe that we should do more, because currently, as I mentioned earlier, our sector does not have the business case, even though we are the largest investors in green hydrogen in CUS. We also invest hugely in renewable electricity and charging points, but still we have seen that there were announcements of big projects that were put on hold and or even cancelled because of the lack of business case. And what do I mean when I say lack of business case? let us not forget that we still don't have a clear view of the market size, because there are still question marks regarding the role of renewable fuels in road transport because of the review of the CO2 regulation that is expected within 2025 and 2026. We have no lead markets. We don't have incentives to support the initial capital or to even de-risk the high cost of renewable fuels. We need support to create all these new value chains that are necessary and really change our business model. We need, of course, a stable and predictable regulatory framework, which is not in place right now. If you see the European legislation, you see very different approaches in red compared to the CO2 regulation or to ETS and RefuelEU Maritime and to RefuelEU Aviation and RefuelEU Maritime. So we need to have a coherent legislation. And moreover, there is also a huge regulatory and compliance burden for our industry. And now we have this debate on simplification and on omnibus in the EU, because this really harms our competitiveness. So we need to keep in mind that first we need to remain competitive, and we really have a lot of pressure from our global competitors because of the very demanding European legislation. And then, while being competitive, we need to be able to transform and invest all these billions that will be used. We estimated as a sector that by 2050, our sector would need 650 billion euros to invest, which is a huge number. And we have to have all the enabling conditions, as I said.
It's a huge number, I agree. And it's a significant effort, the one that has to be done, but it's on the right path. Mr. Atlastauskas, I will come to you and I will ask regarding the decarbonization path of Europe, because it is something that it is progressing in Europe, but there are a number of concerns that are growing in Europe regarding the social and economic costs of decarbonization, and also regarding the affordability and reliability of the grid. We have the incidents in Spain some weeks ago. Do you think that we are moving faster than the pace that we should have in the energy transition, and can society handle this speed and this transition?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, the pace of decarbonization is accelerating, and sometimes we are seeing issues as we have seen before in Europe. Though I always think about the risks that are of moving not fast enough, and if you compare the risks that we are facing in Europe with fast decarbonization and the risks that we would have if we are to fall behind, I think the benefit of fast decarbonization is that at least we can mitigate those risks, and there are a lot of ways how to do it. And I would like to primarily highlight what I mentioned in the presentation, and this is definitely focus must be put on the infrastructure, on the grids, on the build out and refurbishment of the grids, preparation of the system to incorporate renewables, incorporate them efficiently, to be able to distribute clean electrons effectively, and to have a flexible grid that is not congested. In that way, we will have reliable supply of clean energy, but we need to have the infrastructure for that, and the infrastructure needs to be ready. So the fast decarbonization must be accompanied with equally impressive investments and expansion of the grid, and then therefore also expansion of the storage systems, what I also mentioned in the presentation. In the World Energy Outlook last year, we conducted an analysis actually looking into Europe specifically, and what we find is that in the continuous decarbonization in the next 10 years in Europe, we estimate that electricity system costs would reduce by around 10 to 15% by 2035 in Europe. As we move forward into the decarbonization, we start to reap the benefits of the clean energy. We start to reap the benefits of less reliability on the volatile fossil fuel prices. And we don't need to really look far from what we experienced in Europe in 2022, right? We had the energy crisis stemming from the volatility of fossil fuels, from the reliability and dependency on fossil fuels. And the whole world, at the end of the day, experienced an energy crisis. Governments around the world in total paid out close to 1 trillion United States US dollars worth of subsidies for their people in order to support their energy bills, and people still paid around 20% more for their energy bills in 2022 than they did in 2021. And I think that 1 trillion USD could have been spent in much better places if could have been avoided this terrible energy crisis due to the reliance and, again, volatilities in fossil fuels and fossil fuel prices. And so I think the way forward for Europe would need to be kind of a balance between the momentum, the momentum that is currently high on decarbonization. I believe since the risks and the negatives of falling behind decarbonization outweighs the risks of having too fast of a decarbonization, we need to keep the momentum ongoing, but we need to accordingly plan ahead and accordingly invest into the infrastructure. And this is the only way forward, in my opinion, and only if we have a grid that is not congested, a grid that is flexible and it is capable to integrate renewables effectively, we might both have decarbonized economies and also reliable supplies. So this is my take on it, and I would just like to mention that to respond to the comment on the net zero scenario and the investments in fossil fuels. It was never the case that the IEA messaged that investments into fossil fuels should stop. The message was always, if we have sufficient investments in clean technologies, in infrastructure, then in long term, in the net zero scenario, we can avoid investments into fossil fuel projects.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vouliaresi. I will say that besides the economic element that was significant, but not so significant for Europe, at least when considering the decarbonization path. It was mostly the social element, the dependency element. It was other elements that, because we spent significant money in order to do the transition, it was not only to be economically viable.
Yeah, but you got a very high cost outcome. In other words,
exactly.
You need to, I mean, if you're going to optimize the strategy against some environmental goal, we should have had a very balanced approach. Let me give you an interesting example. 20 years ago, the price of electricity in Florida and California was about the same, 10 cents, 12 cents. Over 20 years, the price of electricity in California rose to 32 cents a kilowatt hour. In Florida, it rose to about 14. What was the difference between those two states? As Florida drove out its coal, it replaced it with dispatchable power, natural gas. California decided not to do that. They decided to follow sort of an IEA strategy of deploying the renewables and all this stuff. And it turned out they couldn't manage the cost of that properly. So, and when you look around the world, we really have a responsibility on affordability. And if we are imposing these high costs, it's not going to work worldwide. I mean, even if the entire OECD goes to net zero tomorrow, which is not going to happen, total emissions in 2050 would be maybe 30 gigatons instead of 34 gigatons. Well, I'm asking you, what is the yield of that investment? We have the Bloomberg NEF data. We spent about $11 trillion on so-called climate-friendly technologies. And the worldwide data is very limited. So I really think it needs a huge rethink. And that's what you're going to see out of the Trump administration. You're going to see a massive rethink. You're going to see more interest in nuclear power, more interest in traditional fuels, and if you don't have the U.S. in the system, it's not going to be, the global implications are going to be clear.
And what about the social message, the social element? Do you think that this is declining because of high prices?
Yes, it's declining. There's no interest in this in the developing world, okay? You go to Africa, you go to, in fact, there's resentment throughout the developing world. And so basically it's just it should be a more technocratic, engineering base, not a political base. You know, we should not let our utility systems be run by people who majored in medieval dance theory. Maybe they should be people who were engineers, you know, people who understand how these systems work. Because now, just the commitment for it is good enough. You know, I really believe in these renewables. I'm going to hit these targets. And that's really kind of a crazy way to develop a system which should have a technocratic solution.
Great. So, Mr. Dagomas, I would like to close with you. And I don't know how many times we heard today the word affordability. And the reality is that we have a higher price than expected, at least in the Greek energy market. And this affects also the competitiveness of the Greek companies. Do you see any measures, do you see any solutions in order to save some money from the electricity bill and regain some of the competitiveness?
Yeah, affordability is always the first priority for any social planner. In the region, we face high energy prices in the peak hours. So in order to have decreased energy prices in those peak hours, some investments should take place, and should take place in proper time, in the means that, for example, storage are now more cheap, so they can be invested and provide more competition in those peak hours and eliminate this price differential between base load price and peak prices. All price projections show that the price will be decreased, as also IEA mentioned. So, you know, if those investments will take place, and we plan to have about 2 gigawatts in the next years in Greece of storage that are on track, there is expected to have lower prices also in peak hours.
If I may add regarding affordability, because when we talk about the affordability of energy transition, as I said, it's not only the cost of electricity, but we also need to keep in mind how we will have affordability and access to affordable and sustainable mobility as well, which will be a huge challenge. And let us not forget, giving the Greek dimension, that Greece is the country which has the oldest fleet among all 27 member states in Europe in 3 out of the 4 vehicle categories. So Greek people need to have access to affordable mobility, and in order to do so, we believe that renewable fuels should also have a role in road transport, in a complementary role to electromobility, but they should not be excluded, because we should give the right to all Greek people, even those who cannot afford to pay who cannot afford an electric vehicle, to be part of the decarbonization to the extent they can afford, to the extent they can have some renewable fuels in their existing vehicles.
Great. Thank you so much. Time's up. So thank you all for hearing this panel. I hope you enjoyed. We can move to the next one.